All right, so welcome to the Lincoln City Nature Challenge Speaker Series. Today we're going to be talking about backyard biodiversity. My name's Allie and I'm the Community Science Specialist with Nebraska Game and Parks. So I'm going to be the moderator today, so just checking in the chat to see if you have any questions, helping people, if you have an issue, just shoot me a message on the chat and I can help you try to troubleshoot that. But our speakers today are Jason the Birdnerd from Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center, woohoo! And Kait Chapman from Nebraska Extension, and they're going to be talking to you about things you might find in your backyard or around your home, the local park, that you might be able to find during the City Nature Challenge. Just a heads up, Nebraska Game and Parks does reserve the right to remove anyone during this talk. So just make sure you keep your chats and your behavior kind and courteous. All right, so with that, Kait, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. As Allie said, my name is Kait Chapman. I'm an extension educator of urban entomology, which is the study of insects and their relatives. I'm based here in Lancaster County, but I also cover 4 other counties here in Nebraska. And one of the things I do is just identify urban insects for a lot of people. So I get a lot of emails and phone calls of people asking, what is this bug? And it's usually followed up by, what do I do to kill it? But for today's purposes, we're going to be mostly focusing on the cool stuff that you're going to find out in the wild here in kind of urban Lincoln and Lancaster County. Wrong way. There we go. So in case you're not familiar with what the Lincoln City Nature Challenge is, it's kind of this 2-part challenge, part of the City Nature Challenge 2021, which cities pretty much all over the globe are participating in this. And it's kind of a challenge just to see how many observations that the community can submit of the wildlife that they're seeing in their city, and also how many species that we're seeing in these cities and these urban areas. So from April 30th to May 3rd, the challenge for you guys is if you're able to find some wildlife, get outdoors, snap a picture of what you do find, and then you can upload and share those observations to iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with what iNaturalist is, it's a web app. You can also download it on your phone or your tablet, and it just allows you to upload photos of things you find. You'll say where you found it and when you found it. And if you can't identify it yourself, there's experts out there that will identify it for you. So it's a really cool tool that you can use anytime, not just for the City Nature Challenge. But we do have our own little project on iNaturalist where you can submit the things that you find in this time frame. So the 30th to May 3rd. And then from May 4th to May 9th, after all of those observations are submitted, then that's when we're going to start kind of this identification period. So we'll try to identify all the observations that were submitted to our project via iNaturalist. And so this presentation is part of the Lincoln City Nature Challenge Speaker Series, and there are going to be 3 more presentations part of this series after this. So those are going to be Tuesdays at 7 or Sundays at 4. April 20th is going to be Nebraska Nature Nerd Night. April 25th is going to be all about mammals around town. And then April 27th is going to be kind of the kickoff event for the CNC called Find, Snap, Share. And in that presentation, we're going to tell you, areas around Lincoln and the county where you're going to be able to find wildlife, as well as how to use that iNaturalist platform so you can participate too. And then in addition to that, we also have some ID parties set up. So if you do find some things around Lincoln and you submitted it to iNaturalist, but you're not quite sure what it is and you're kind of interested and maybe want to ask some experts questions about how to ID or if they can ID it, you're welcome to attend these. They're going to be really informal during the weekday around lunch. And so Tuesday is going to be about mammals and reptiles. Wednesday will be birds featuring Jason here. Thursday will be insects, spiders, and more. And then Friday is going to be all about plants and fungi. So you are all welcome to attend that as well. And so really to kind of kick off this presentation in particular, it's called Backyard Biodiversity. So what exactly is biodiversity? So it's the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. And so for the sake of the CNC, our habitat or ecosystem is going to be in Lincoln, Nebraska. And, you know, it's not quite as extravagant as going to a rainforest in Costa Rica or somewhere else, but we do have a lot of urban wildlife here, even if it's something as simple as, you know, a seagull flying through. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Jason.
All right. Thanks, Kate. So yes, I am Jason the Birdnerd Sanseve, and we are going to talk about some of the common species that you might find around Lincoln, Nebraska. We're focusing on since that's our area. But don't forget, the like Kate said, the City Nature Challenge is international, so you can still participate, not necessarily in the Lincoln one if you're not here in Lincoln or Lancaster County, but you can still put your observations in and they count for the World City Nature Challenge, which is pretty exciting too. So anytime during those dates, you can do some iNaturalist observations and put them in there. It's a lot of fun. So I'm going to share my screen, and the first species we're going to talk about is birds. Big surprise, because I'm the bird nerd. Let's go here and there and here and there. All right, does everybody see a lovely Baltimore Oriole, hopefully? Great. Well, there are so many backyard birds that I could talk about, but I tried to put it to some of the ones, especially focusing around the Lincoln area, that you would probably most likely see in your yard if you go out for a walk along the sidewalks in Lincoln or in this area, some of the common ones. And hopefully I'll throw in some sounds and some trivia about the birds as we go through too. So first are some birds that really haven't gone anywhere. They've been here in Lincoln all year round, or mostly. Those resident birds. First one I put up is the northern cardinal. And on the right there, you've got a male singing and you've got a female on the other side, because actually both cardinals sing. It's a really cool thing about northern cardinals. They've got those great finch-like beaks, like a big vise for cracking into seeds. And pretty identifiable. Most people know this bird, even if they don't know the name northern cardinal, they know it as the red bird. You're probably also hearing them right now. They're very loud, so not only seeing them. If you're not seeing the females a lot, it could be as resident birds, they tend to breed earlier, so they may already be on nests. I know the robins in my backyard are already sitting on a nest. So that could be why you maybe don't see the females as much. But definitely look for them. They're a very common backyard bird, at least east of the Rockies. When you get to the west, if you're from out west, you may not see cardinals out there. If you're from the Southwest, though, you may get a really cool cousin, the Pyrrholoxia, which is a really awesome bird. Okay. Another very common bird all across the country pretty much is the American robin. One of my favorites, just a really great song in the morning singing cheer up, cheerio, right? And they're just really love yards. So they're great for a backyard biodiversity talk. They love the earthworms. They really take advantage of that superfood. There's so much nutrition in the earthworms. And they've even been known, if any of you are gardeners, as you're digging up the mulch, if you've got robins around and you really enjoy them, throw a few of the worms that you might dig up as you're tilling the soil over to the side, and they'll get used to you doing that, and they'll actually kind of come and follow you around when you do yard work or gardening work, which is really fun. They're great birds. Males and females look similar. You can tell them apart. This is definitely a male. Do you see how dark black the head is? It's very bold orange. The female looks the same, but just sort of almost as if her feathers were washed out. This looks more overall kind of drab brown, and this is like a light kind of duller, I guess is the only word I can use, a slightly duller orange. And blue jays, definitely another common bird who, even if you don't see them, you will hear them, right? Really loud and vociferous, big screamy noises. What's fun about blue jays, especially, watch them if you get the chance. They work in teams. They're in the jay and corvid family, related to crows and magpies and things. And they live in family groups with aunt and uncle and little brother and sister, a lot of times, 6 to 8 at a time. They actually will help with nesting as well during the year. But they help search for food. And so that's what all that noise is they're usually talking to each other. If they're even noisier than usual, run out there and figure out why. There might be a fox below a tree, or there might be a hawk up higher in the tree. They are one of the wooded areas or the town, like the bird, like alarm system. If something is around that they don't like, they're gonna let you know. Really, really fun birds. And don't forget, not really blue. Blows my mind every time I think about that, right? That's how our eyes see it, right? Going through those feathers. It's not really a natural pigment. Who knows what the blue jays are seeing when they look at each other? If they see in UV, it could be like lime green. That'd be cool. All right, couple other ones. Another one that gets missed a lot because they're not quite as loud and their beautiful colors are much more muted. And a lot of times they're kind of quietly sitting there on the ground, but it's such a lovely sound in the morning of the mourning dove. Right? And you can tell them apart, male from female. The male tends to have a longer tail, not always, but they have that long pointed tail, and they're much more colorful for a mourning dove. He's got that beautiful kind of light blue, almost eyeshadow around his eye. You see that iridescence of pink and blue around his neck when he's singing? That usually shows up in the sun, where the female is just more of this overall brown color without all of those other colors. And she tends to be a little bit smaller, which actually is odd in the bird world. A lot of females are slightly larger because they do have to carry the eggs. So like female hawks a lot of times are larger than the males. But in the mourning dove, they're a little smaller. And house finches. Great bird to see right now because they are even redder than they usually are. Red on the head, sometimes on the back a little bit. Don't get confused if you live out west with the Cassin's finch and the purple finches. They tend to be a much more strawberry color. This is really red, right? Like that's scarlet. The other two finches that could look like this are definitely more of a pinky kind of strawberry jam color than this real red. And the male house finches are really singing like crazy right now. It almost doesn't stop. Like I swear the one in my backyard tree the other day, it was like 3 or 4 minutes long and she was not having any of it. She was just eating. She was bored with his song. I don't think he was going to have a nest. That's my guess, but I could be wrong. All right. Two of a lot of people's favorites are the wren species, and there are many wrens in backyards all across the country. Carolina wrens actually can migrate, but they don't go very far if they go anywhere at all. So we do have them in Lincoln throughout the winter sometimes. Really known for their bubbly tea kettle song, right? And if there's a wren in your yard or in your neighborhood, you're going to hear it. They are not quiet. They like to tell you. They also scold cats and squirrels and anything else they don't really like near their nest. So they're always around. Really, really fun. Carolina is going to be the one with the bold russet on the back and that big bright white line. If you live out west, it could be a Buick's wren. Looks very similar, but not quite so reddy underneath, a lot more kind of pale because they live in a little bit more shrub and drier areas. So overall, it looks like this bird, but just kind of washed out in color. And then this one isn't a real resident, but they should be arriving in the Lincoln Lancaster area anytime. If you live south of us in Kansas or Missouri, you probably already heard them babbling because they're arriving there. The house wren. Very, very overall, just kind of dull brown, but again, not quiet. And that's a song that's hard for me to do. But if you hear a bird that sounds like it is singing a babbling brook, that is a house wren. Just kind of barbles and babbles and bobbles all over the place. Really, really fun little bird. Definitely backyards, especially these two. If you have thickets, if you've got like a hedgerow or a good thicket of shrubs, They don't necessarily love yard, right? If you think of turf grass all mown down, they need something to hide in because they like to stay low and they nest low. So they usually want a lot of shrubs and that kind of stuff around. Don't forget to, as you're seeing these, if you're not sure what you saw, if you got a picture, that's the best. So have a nice camera handy or even your phone to snap something that's close enough and we can see if we can identify it. But don't forget to take sound. If you can't see the bird, but you can hear it, take an audible recording because that counts on iNaturalist too. We can identify the bird by that. We have a lot of invasive species birds that love cities, so they're a very common bird in around Lincoln. House sparrow is probably the most common, pretty much in every city across the country. And you've got a good range of their patterns here. Here's one of the males with the black bib and the black eyes. The female's pretty plain, but very, very common. And they tend to be in larger groups like this. You usually don't see a house sparrow by itself. They live in a very social environment all together, nest together. But they're definitely around. Eurasian collared doves, very similar to the mourning dove, but a lot larger. And as you can see, pretty white and gray instead. They get named for this little black collar you can see here. Some people might call them turtle doves, but that's actually a different bird. They're a lot smaller, and the turtle dove was one that was bred to be in sort of cages and stuff. So if there's one of those and you think it's that, it's probably a released pet or an escaped from somewhere. So most of these big ones, though, in the wild are Eurasian collared doves. You've probably heard them. Sometimes they get mistaken for owls. Very fun. European starlings used to be the most successful of our invasive species. They pretty much live all across the country, known for their bright, sort of kaleidoscopic, beautiful, iridescent feathers. Nest in a lot of the buildings, so definitely an urban bird. Really fun to watch in the fall when they start getting into big groups and form the murmurations as they zoom around. And if you haven't, definitely read how they figured out they believe they do that. It's always been a mystery, but there's a lot of papers recently on the rule of 7, and it's if 7 birds always kind of follow a leader, then all 7, that whole pattern can all stay together. I don't know, it's crazy to me, but it's really, really cool. And then, of course, pigeons. Now, pigeons get a bad rap, especially in some cities, because they're kind of everywhere. They eat garbage, but they're really cool, especially if you start looking at them. They have so many cool patterns, and I know why, so watch them closely. I confuse them with other birds sometimes just because their colors are so different, right? They can be all these different variations, especially this one with the white wings. I always think it's going to be some really cool hawk or something coming flying in. And then I'm like, oh, it's a pigeon. But I shouldn't. I should be like, oh, it's a pigeon. Yeah. But they're really cool, especially if you're doing the nature challenge in the city, right? If you live downtown or you're in a city, you might see them. So maybe it's fun to try to see how many variations you can spot. I know we did that when I lived in New York City. All right, we'll do a couple more birds here and then we're going to zip it over to Kait because we want to get to some insects too. Woodpeckers are a very common bird around cities because we plant trees. We have shelter belts, things like that, and they love them. They are pretty used to people and they love feeders. So 2 common ones are the hairy and the downy. Downy way more common. So if you're not sure, it's most likely the downy. But there is a really great way to tell. One, if you're ever lucky enough to see them side by side like that, which you don't very often, is size. Look at how tiny that little downy woodpecker is. It's only a little bit bigger than a house sparrow. They're not super large. And these are both females, no red on the back, right? On the back of the head. But the other great way to tell if you only see one at a time is look at their beak. If you can look at the beak of a bird, and if you double it and it doesn't go all the way through the head, like if you took a second beak and you measured it against the head, it wouldn't be the whole head of that downy woodpecker. If you look at that beak right there, and then you measure it, it literally, another beak would be the same size as the whole head. It's much larger. So that's a great way to tell hairy. You can tell them by sound too, but it's much trickier. So I would definitely like listen to those first. Hairy definitely aren't as common as downies, but they can be tricky because the pattern is almost identical on the back and the sides. What's even crazier is they're not that closely related. We always thought they were, like that they were close cousins, but the gene research they've done on them recently is they both sort of evolved with that pattern for different reasons, and it just happens that they look a lot alike. Totally cool. Couple other really amazing woodpeckers that are around is the one that is in the woodpecker family, but hardly is ever pecking on wood because it loves to eat ants off the ground, is the northern flicker. So around here, we almost always see the yellow shafted type of northern flicker. So it's going to have yellow feathers under the wings and on the tail. And then it's going to have this black malar line if it's the male. But out west, if you live western Nebraska or west of that even, this is going to be a reddy pink color, and this is going to be red if it's a male, and that is the red shafted flicker. Both northern flickers, but they're just different. It's not a morph, I'm going to forget the right word for that, but they're different subspecies, I think, of the northern flicker. Really, really cool bird, really loud. This one gets once in a while, likes to, the males pound on the aluminum siding or aluminum chimneys on homes to sound even bigger and tougher. So they get in trouble or we'll get calls. How do I get them to stop doing that? And I usually say, oh, you don't, just go out and watch. It's really cool. That's usually not the right answer though. And red-bellied woodpeckers, one of my favorites. They make lots of fun noises. They've got this great little like kind of crazy noise. And they also chuck, 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 chuck. It sounds a little bit like squirrels. And you can tell male from female. In this picture, the male has obviously been either excavating this hole or sitting on some chicks or feeding them maybe. But this is the male where red goes from front all the way back on the head. And the female has some space right there. There's no color on top there. Sometimes there's yellow here, but no red until it starts way back here in the back of the head and goes down. Really, really fun to watch woodpeckers both excavate their holes, dig for bugs in those trees or on the ground. And again, you can get some good shots of them coming to your feeder. Last couple I want to talk about is the chickadee, the nuthatch, and the goldfinch. Really common birds all across the country. Even if you're not here around Lincoln, there's chickadee species, right, all over the country. You've got chestnut-sided and boreal up north, and you've got Carolina chickadees in the southeast. Very similar, all kind of say their own name, right? Chickadee-dee-dee-dee in some sort. Around here, the black-capped chickadee, though, is starting to sing for territory. So listen for cheeseburger, too. Right, it's an adorable little song. Goldfinches are singing like crazy and getting their bright yellow plumage, and the nuthatches are really getting loud and excavating, and they've been caching seeds in a lot of the bark for all winter so that they made it through the winter so that they can have a nice nest this spring. I think I might have just the blackbirds left, and then we're going to turn it over some birds. I know that grackles are not everybody's favorite, but they're usually a pretty common bird you can see around. There's a lot of kinds across the country. Right here in Lincoln, mostly the common grackle. And another to watch out for because they've become much more used to cities and edges, like sort of what we call edge habitat, right? Where there's a little wild next to suburban areas, is the brown-headed cowbird. So watch for those. Or if you happen to peek in, if you're lucky enough to have birds nesting in your yard and you look in their nest carefully and you see different colored eggs, there might be a brown-headed cowbird around who has dumped an egg in there because they are nest parasites. Lots more birds I'm sure you can see, but we have a lot more cool backyard biodiversity to talk about. So Kate, I'm going to turn it over for you for a bit and we can chat about some of the inverts we might see.
Great, thank you, Jason. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to top that, but I'll try my best. All right, let me see really quick here as we switch over screens. Okay, great. So I'm going to go over some backyard bugs. They're not nearly quite as colorful this time of year as maybe some of the birds that Jason shared. In fact, spring is kind of, right now, is pretty early for insect season here in Nebraska. A lot of times we see a lot more diversity of insects and other arthropods more towards late summer and early fall. But today I'm going to cover some things that you might be seeing outdoors now. So like Jason had mentioned, if you're not able to snap a picture of a live specimen, there's plenty of other things that you can submit for the City Nature Challenge as well. So a lot of times you'll find dead insects on the ground. Those are perfectly acceptable to snap pictures of as well. Cast exoskeletons. So this is an example of a cicada exoskeleton that's going to be pretty early in the year for those here, but there's all insects and arthropods do shed their exoskeletons. Galls and nests, in particular, wasps are starting to be pretty active. You're going to see a lot of galls and different types of damage, as we can see the tree damage here on plants as these insects are starting to feed actively and make their homes. And protective homes. So this first picture is of a bagworm, and those are really common on evergreen plants. If you see them, there's going to be either a caterpillar or a moth inside. Pupal cases, so that's like chrysalis or cocoons. A lot of our larger moths aren't going to be coming out until a little bit later in the season, but there's a good chance that you'll be able to see their cocoons. And on this caterpillar here is an example of it's being parasitized. So those are actually wasp cocoons that are sticking out of it, and that totally counts too. Like I said, you can submit plant damage. If you don't see an insect, but you're like, hey, something was definitely eating this plant, that counts as evidence of wildlife as well. And then especially this time of year, you're going to be seeing a lot of eggs. So this is an example of some eggs that I found on a pine tree just a couple of days ago, and those are actually lady beetle eggs. So just keep an eye out for things like that. And so just to get it out of the way, these are super common right now, and they are by far my least favorite arthropod, and I'm sure a lot of you guys as well. But even if you're not looking for ticks, there's a good chance that they're going to find you while you're out looking for wildlife. So those are something that you absolutely can submit to the City Nature Challenge. In fact, we encourage you to submit pictures of ticks regardless, because right now there's kind of this big movement of tracking the distribution of ticks and tracking, tick disease. So first and foremost, if you're out looking for wildlife, I'm sure as Jason can attest, if you're in Spring Creek Prairie, always do yourself a good tick check afterwards. And ID is really important in case illness develops. So here in eastern Nebraska, we get 3 common species of tick. So the American dog tick is the big one that's out right now. So if you found a big tick on you, it's a good chance that's what it is. The Lone Star tick, and then just, I believe last year or 2019, we found established populations of the black-legged tick or the deer tick, and that is the one that transmits Lyme disease. So those populations have been found in Douglas-Sarpy counties, not yet established in Lancaster, but there's a good chance that you might still be able to find one because, of course, we have all sorts of animals that, migrate through, walk through that can still, carry things like ticks. So keep an eye out. And if you ever do find that you've had a tick on you, always snap a pic so you know what species it is. That way you can just, check for symptoms that may develop within several days. Now that we've got the gross out of the way, let's get on to something a little more pretty that you're going to be seeing outdoors. So just this past couple of weeks, we've gotten a lot of sightings of bumble and carpenter bees. And I wanted to really highlight the difference between these two because a lot of people are seeing these carpenter bees around their home. but they're not bumblebees. And the way that you can tell the difference is that carpenter bees here, which is the right picture, have kind of this shinier abdomen, this shiny black abdomen, while bumblebees are going to have a furry abdomen throughout. And so it's really important to know the difference, because while they're both really great pollinators, they nest in very different ways. Bumblebees will nest in, a lot of times we see them in the ground, maybe in like vacant rabbit holes. Occasionally they're going to get into like hollow structures, like maybe there's a little hollow space in a tree, or a little hollow space in like a compost or a mulch pile or something like that. Whereas carpenter bees, as their name kind of suggests, they do make their nests inside wood. So you can look around for little holes in wood that's about the diameter of your pinky finger, and carpenter bees will make nests in those, and a lot of the times they reuse it year after year. And then, especially this time of year, if you see a really large bumblebee, the chances are that it's going to be a queen. So these queens are starting now to establish their colonies. Their drones or their workers are quite a bit smaller. So if you see a really large bumblebee, be on the lookout, because that's probably going to be a queen. Another, ants are definitely out and about. I say that while Jason was talking, I saw an ant crawl across my wall right behind my computer monitor. It's like, oh, that would have been perfect. But one ant species in particular that might be a little more noticeable to people are citronella ants. So this right picture is my porch. Every year I have 2 times a year, I get a swarm of citronella ants that come out. And so all of these winged ants that live underneath the soil, and they tend aphids and farm honeydew a lot, but they'll come out in these big swarms of winged ants, not unlike, honeybees that swarm, except all of these winged ants are reproductives that are going to go off and, do their own thing and make their own colonies. This is what they look like up close, and they're called citronella ants because if you squish them, which, I don't encourage you to do because, let the wildlife be, but if you do happen to see some squished ones, they smell like citronella. These are certainly not the only ants that are out and about. There's all sorts of ants out there, and wildlife isn't limited to the outdoors too, especially when it comes to insects and arthropods. You can certainly find a lot of these things in your very own home. Things like spiders to the really terrible things like bed bugs, but yeah, you will find arthropods pretty much everywhere you look. Other things that you see this time of year, including bees, are going to be a lot of bee mimics. And there's a lot of things that look like bees and they pollinate and they visit flowers, but they're different. So does anybody other than our experts here know how to tell the difference between a bee and a fly? If you do, you can drop it in the chat. I'll give you a couple seconds. So there's a lot of things that mimic bees and wasps. We have clear wing moths that have clear wings, kind of like a bee would have, and they're kind of yellow and black striped. We have flies, all sorts of things. I can't see the chat. Did anyone answer?
No, nobody's put anything in the chat.
Darn it.
We have a
So
shy
the
audience.
easiest way to tell.
Oh, Tyler says 2 wings versus 4.
Yeah, exactly, Tyler. So if you can get a close enough look, so both of these pictures are actually species of syrphid flies that are really, they're bee mimicking flies. So flies, all flies only have 1 pair of wings, so 2 wings total, as you can see in these pictures, while bees and wasps will have 4 wings total. So that's the easiest way you can tell. There's other ways you can tell from antennae, but usually the number of wings is the go-to. So be on the lookout for these. They're visiting a lot of flowers right now, especially with spring, and Jason's going to talk about blooms here. We're going to get a lot of the pollinators starting to come out here. So be on the lookout for your bees, your wasps, your flies. There are a lot of beetles that will pollinate too. So blooms are a great place to look for insects. Other different types of arthropods that you're going to be able to find So this one on the left, he's a little scary looking, but I think the picture makes it look bigger than it actually is. That's going to be a soil centipede. So not only on blooms, but other good places to find arthropods are going to be, on the ground in the soil. And there you're going to find things like these centipedes. You'll likely find millipedes this time of year as well. Roly-polies or pill bugs, those are pretty much going to be around all year if you look for them. Another thing that was commonly submitted for last year's City Nature Challenge were spiders. So you're going to find a lot of grass spiders and wolf spiders now. Orb weaver spiders, the one that makes those like beautiful webs, those are most noticeable in the fall, but there are a couple species that are out right now. Usually you kind of have to look in more like tree or shrub foliage to find those things, but these wolf and grass spiders, they're going to be ground dwelling. They don't make those big, beautiful webs, but instead they kind of make tunnels in the grass and in the soil. So be on the lookout for those. And as I mentioned, I had found all of those ladybug eggs, and I found, the mama ladybugs hanging around the pines in particular. So you're going to find those beetles as well. And just a note about insects is that insects are the most diverse organisms as far as the number of species go in the whole world. And I think the statistic is, and Jason, maybe you know, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that 1 in every 4 species is a species of beetle. So 1 in every 4 species is a beetle. So they're super diverse. And sometimes when we try to get things down to the species level, it's going to be pretty difficult. So one thing that you can keep in mind, if you see an insect or an arthropod that's feeding on a plant, what's something that's super helpful in IDing is knowing what type of plant it is. So this picture on the left might be a giveaway given the monarch caterpillar that's on it. But if you were to see something tiny like these aphids, and it's like, you're not going to be able to identify the aphid species underneath the unless you have a really strong microscope. But if we knew that this plant it was feeding on was a milkweed plant, that narrows down the species list pretty good for us. So these are oleander aphids, and it's going to be pretty early in the year to see aphids like these. But if you do see insects on a plant in particular, just kind of, take a step back when you're taking your picture too and get a picture of the plant, because that can help us identify what type of insect it is. And that's kind of our segue back into blooms, which I'm going to throw it back over to Jason here.
Cool. And I think, Allie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think iNaturalist has a notes thing too. So if you didn't happen to get a picture of the plant the bug was on, if you forgot, I think you can type it in if you remember later, or if you know the plant, you can just say was eating on or was nectaring on and type it right in there. All right. I learned a whole bunch there and I have questions, so I hope you guys do too for Kait later when we get there. But we are going to do some blooms here in just a second when I can figure out the right thing to push. There it is. And there's my birds. So the next one should be, we talked about those, move forward. There they are, blooms. So tons of those inverts, the insects, bees. I've already seen a few early butterflies and moths out. I think it was, and I'm not sure because it's hard to tell and I didn't get a picture, but the either question mark or the Eastern comma, they look really similar without seeing that mark on their wing. But I think it was one of those out, and a really cool moth I'd never seen before, and I'm forgetting what it's called right now, but they are starting to be around. So watch your blooms. So it's a great part of iNaturalist is to not only snap a picture of the plant, but also check it really close, especially like on this picture. Sometimes there are tiny little arthropods and insects right in there that you may not have seen with the naked eye. So get a nice photo and we might be able to find those too. So I am not a super great plant expert. So what I put together for you is just a real common list of What we know you'll probably see around the Lincoln-Lancaster County area, there's way more. And I want to start that by saying almost all of these are cultivated. So if you're going to participate in the iNaturalist City Nature Challenge and doing that, when you take pictures of anything growing in a yard, in a town park, or pretty much all within an urban or suburban area, it was planted. So put cultivated. There's a little button there that you can click. That will really help us know like kind of the difference. Other than native prairie areas, like where I work at Spring Creek Prairie, areas of 9 Mile Prairie, though, even though it's been replanted, there are things now that are growing wild, right? So other than really wild areas, most of the things for plants are going to be cultivated because they were planted to be in town. One of the biggest and easiest to see is going to be trees, but there's some cool ways to help us identify them if you don't know them, or to help you identify them. Leaves is one. Everything is just starting to bud out now, so make sure to get pictures of leaves. I threw some of the common species you might see around Lincoln here. If you think about Lincoln and Lancaster County and pretty much all of Nebraska, two of the most common trees that have been here for thousands of years are cottonwoods and bur oaks. Now you may not, whoops, I got to go back. I hit a button too soon. You may not see as many right around town, but if you're on the outskirts or into a more suburban or rural area of Lancaster County, you would definitely probably see those too. And you've got the leaves and some early seeds coming off the picture up here in the upper right. And then down lower left, you've got a beautiful bur oak there. It's a nice little acorn in it, probably too early in the year to see those. But there might be the old shell from past years or some acorns on the ground from last year's if the squirrels or blue jays didn't get them. So there's lots of signs of trees other than the actual tree that you could find too. Maples are very common city trees, so definitely watch for those. And we have many, both native species that are from the United States and some others that are used in landscaping, but almost all of them have that very identifiable maple leaf in some form. Probably going to be green right now because all of the beautiful colors that the maples turn isn't until the fall. Some of the most common ones around Lincoln are sugars, silvers, and red maples. Eastern redbud is one that if you see it right now, you cannot miss it. It is so fuchsia. They're blooming right now. Perhaps in 2 weeks, there won't be as many quite as bright, but there will probably still be some blooming. It's a beautiful little tree. Usually isn't too large. Planted for, of course, its beauty. It's ornamental, but it supports some pollinators. They will definitely love to nectar on there. So check it out, not only to get a picture of the plant, but see who is buzzing around those blooms if it's still blooming. It's a really cute little tree. I like Eastern redbuds. Common hackberry is a really cool tree that we have a lot of in the Lincoln Lancaster area. And it's a fun one because I didn't know this because trees aren't my specialty, but it's one you can identify by the bark. It has really identifiable bark. So if the leaves are way up high, because it's a pretty tall tree, and you're not sure what it is, or it's hard to get a good picture with your phone, take a picture of the bark because we can still identify it. It has very deep patterned, almost like canyon-like gouges in the bark formation. So it's a really cool one. I know that the woodpeckers and the nuthatches we talked about in birds love to dig in it because a lot of the beetles and other types of insects like to burrow in and hide under and live in those huge canyons of bark running on the hackberry. And I believe the hackberry butterfly has to, the caterpillar I think lives on it. I could be wrong on that, but I know that there is, that's part of the reason it's named the hackberry butterfly is it has part of its life cycle on that tree. I know that. I may not know the exact part of the life cycle. And finally, another tree you'll definitely see around, planted a lot for shelter belts. It's great for wildlife overwintering in Nebraska. We don't like to see it out in the middle of the prairies because it can take a lot of water resources, but around suburban areas for sure, eastern red cedars And look for it. Don't just get a picture of the tree. Go up and look for those bagworms like that Kait meant. They love to hang off the eastern red cedar. There's also this cool organism, the cedar rust, the apple cedar rust that might be living off of it too. There's lots of fun things that you can find just on one tree. So trees are a great one where like you could spend a half an hour getting iNaturalist and you could have found 30 species of things. It's really, really fun. Couple other trees you might see around that aren't from the United States are these. They're very common used in landscaping, especially in urban areas. You've got a ginkgo tree down here, Bradford pears. Don't confuse them with the plums that are blooming right now, because we do have a lot of wild plum, and there are some sort of domesticated small tree versions, but Bradford pear are a lot larger and the flowers are slightly different. Crabapple trees, right? There are some native versions, but most of the ornamental ones are not from around here. Beautiful. They smell really great and have the great fruit in the fall. And then the 2 locust trees, we have a lot of them around Lincoln, Lancaster County. They have those very long kind of leaf pattern, beautiful flowers coming up later in the summer. And if you walk through Wilderness Park and you see that, one, don't walk into it, right? Ouch. But you can for sure know that that's a honey locust tree, right? If you get that pattern of thorns and just take a picture of that, we'll know what that is. iNaturalist will know what that is. So if you see anything hanging on it or look around it, I have seen birds, insects, lots of things use those thorns to hide under, to make a nest around. There's even one bird, the shrike, that might use it to poke its food on and leave for later. Scrubby shrubs. A lot of people love to landscape with shrubs, and I love that because the birds love that, right? And if the birds love it, that means the bugs probably do too. So it's great for wildlife. Native ones are going to be a little better, of course, but we got some beautiful other shrubs in here. Lilacs is a really common one you can find around most urban and suburban areas, and they smell really lovely. Pretty lovely heart-shaped leaves. So most of the time, even if they're not blooming, we can figure out what that is if you can get us a picture of the leaves, right? Forsythias are blooming at this time of year, that bright yellow. So that's a pretty fun one to see and to find. I mentioned those wild plums, really yummy smelling right now. I can't stop. Like, I swear I don't even see them and I just am walking towards them because I smell them. They smell so good. But that's one where the wild plum thicket, if there's one around, definitely look in there. Bird nest might be in there. So many of the native flies that Kait was mentioning, the little bee mimics, love the wild plum. I've seen tons around those. So that's a great place to look. There's also 3 other native shrubs that might just be getting ready to bloom. It might be a little early yet, but also have white blooms that look similar. But that is viburnum shrubs, dogwoods, and elderberry. All really, really great for pollinators, really great for birds with their berries in the fall. Probably tons of really cool insects and things under the leaves. Don't forget to flip a leaf over, right? If you're looking at it, take a picture of the leaf top, but then look underneath because there's usually so much more life under there. Spiders make these crazy little like almost looks like mold, but it's actually some sort of egg casing or nest that they might have. So there's so much biodiversity going on top and under a leaf. So don't forget to look under. Oops, oh, and there's the names. I forgot to hit that, but I talked about them. I'm so excited I get going ahead of them. Let's see, what else might you find? Rascally weeds, as I'm calling them, and I know that's not how you spell rascally, but I like alliterations, so I did it anyway. Some really common plants around our yards, unless you don't like the weeds and you've gotten rid of them. I let some of them go because I don't have enough native plants yet in my yard for my liking. So a few of the weeds still have some really great little blooms for some bugs until I get some more blooming. But these are some really fun ones that are blooming right now that you might find. They'll grow right in the sidewalk cracks sometimes. So pretty much could find them anywhere. Things like violets, there's several kinds. The henbit and the creeping Charlie, right, are blooming right now, both in the mint family. So if you feel them, feel the stem, right? Even if they're not blooming, you can pretty much tell, or just rub a leaf and it'll smell minty, right? I love the smell when I mow over my big field of creeping Charlie. I know people don't love it in their yard, but it makes my mowing smell a lot better to me. And I love looking on Henbit because it's got these very, if you were a kid when I was a kid, the Jetsons were still on. And I always feel these are like little like landing pads for several of the space, right? It's got these cool levels. But I feel like some of those insects use it that way, right? Some of the bees and the flying bug like will come in and some will be on this level and some will be up here. It's a really fun one. Dandelion, of course, everybody knows. And don't forget the clovers. I put up white and red clover, but we also later in the year will get sweet clover, the yellow one. There's many kinds around urban areas. And I believe this is the one the kids taught me this. I teach kids a lot and they like to eat that one. They like pull off a little bit and you can taste just a little sweet at the end of the bloom, which is probably what some of those pollinators are going for, right? That yummy nectar in there. How are we doing on time, Allie? I'm just about done. Do we have, looks like we're good. We'll have just enough time for questions. So last few slides I've got, grasses can be tough. So get some close-up pictures. Plus a lot of the grasses won't have seed head yet, right? Which is a lot of grasses you need to look at like when it's blooming or the seed head to really tell. But try to get some close pictures. Around urban areas, unless someone has planted native grasses, you're pretty much going to have the types of turf grass. There's some pretty common ones. Fescue is one of the most kinds, right? Common kinds for turf grass for a lawn, and Kentucky bluegrass. Or if you're in an area where you had a larger acreage and you might have had farm animals or ranching with cows, smooth brome is probably the most common grass out there. That was brought into the country, especially planted because it's great for grazing cattle and horses and things. So smooth brome I know is everywhere. But in your lawn, it might be a type of Kentucky bluegrass or fescue, unless you have planted some native grasses. Or if you have weeds like I do and don't take care of the lawn enough, you also might get some crabgrass along some edges. Lots of other weedy species. Some folks have planted buffalo grass around Nebraska. That is a little bit more drought tolerant than some of the other grasses. So it might also be buffalo grass in a lawn. I really like the idea of trying to get a lawn or lawn areas out of native sedges. They grow really thick. They're a little harder to get established first. They need a little bit more water, but boy, once they get going, you get this really lush tufts of grass. And I just can't forget one of my favorite plants of all time, our state plant, which is little bluestem. Does grow really well, both in urban and out in the wild. Once it's established too, you don't have to water it much. It pretty much takes care of itself because it's so used to the Nebraska landscape. So it's a really fun one. This is probably a little later in the summer or fall because it's already got the seed tufts, but pretty easy to see around Lincoln in like the medians, in the health strips, and in some landscaping around some of the urban areas. Finally, it's a great time. Everybody is planting annuals. Don't forget, if you take pictures of these, and you totally can, please do. But mark cultivated, right? These are all plants someone has planted, obviously. Almost all the ones we just mentioned were. But don't forget to look for bugs. Even though these are planted annuals, many of our native species have learned that they can get some food from some of them. Like I know ants have some crazy relationship with peonies that help them open and they crawl all over them. But you've got all kinds here, petunias and irises. Who else do we have on here? Pansies and tons of the bulbs, right? Like tulips. Who else is in there? Daffodils. And I forget what this one's called. Is that hyacinths? I forget what those are. But so many of the colors. If you are like me and you like to use more native plants to attract more native bugs and birds, you also might see, it's a little early for them to be blooming, but check the leaves. There might be some sprouts of some native plants coming up. I put a picture of several of the milkweeds from around here on the screen. but there might be other things like right now in my yard, the baptisia is coming up, the wild indigo. Some of the compass plant is coming back up. Lots of cool native plants. Rattlesnake master. Oh, if you don't know that plant, look it up. It's super cool. Lots of cool plants popping up. So look close under leaf litter and things, not only for those centipedes and millipedes, but look for sprouts and take a picture. We might know what it is. So I think that is all I have, Allie and Kate. It is. Let's stop sharing so you don't have to see that ugly one. And let's see who has questions. We would love to hear your questions about the City Nature Challenge, biodiversity, things you might find in your yard.
Thanks, Jason. We did have a question from Mike. He said, I've been seeing fewer goldfinches in recent years. Is that a trend in the region?
Not that I know. I haven't heard that for sure. I would say birds in general. We do know that overall birds, especially in the past 30 years, have decreased a lot. There's also, be careful if you feed goldfinches, house finches, and pine siskins, especially right now. Clean your feeders, especially if you use specific like thistle or small seed for those type of species. They are really, they used to get conjunctivitis really bad, which can be lethal if it gets really bad and the bird can't see. But there's also a bad case of salmonella going around in that species. So finches are tricky because they're slightly eruptive, Mike. So it could just be where the resources are, right? There are many years where you cannot see them at all. And then one year there's a whole bunch of them. Like I didn't see any goldfinches in my little yard the past 2 years, hardly at all. And I've got 6 or 7 at my feeders constantly this year. So maybe there's good resources around and that group has moved in. I wouldn't worry yet. If that trend continues and you don't see them for 3 years, then I would worry. So keep watching. We'll keep a track of the numbers, but from what I know, goldfinch overall numbers aren't significantly down.
Thanks, Jason. Gary said that he has been seeing checkered skipper butterflies laying eggs on mallows already. So that's an exciting sighting.
Allie, you're muted.
I've just been chatting away at myself. I just threw a link in the chat for an evaluation for the program. If you want to go ahead and fill that out before you leave today, that just helps us make sure we make our programs better as we go. Jason, Kate actually had a question for you. She was asking you about hummingbirds and if we can expect to see any in Nebraska this time of year.
Good question. It would be rare, but the rule has always been, there's kind of like this fun little map, and I can't think of who put it out. I would bet it was Cornell Lab of Ornithology would be my guess, and it kind of just shows times of arrival bands across the United States for hummingbirds. They always say to put your feeders up for hummingbirds and Baltimore Orioles here in Lincoln around tax day. The latest May 1st, because May 1st is around when they arrive. So if you put it up a few weeks early, I just put mine up this weekend. So it's a good time to think about hummingbirds and orioles, right? If you feed those, but they should be arriving. So there is a chance that you could see them in the City Nature Challenge, definitely. Other parts of the country, right? Like down in Texas, they've been seeing black-chinned hummingbirds probably all year round, or at least already. We're not so lucky, but yes, ruby-throated hummingbirds should be coming usually by the end of the month.
Thanks, Jason. I had a question actually about the pigeons. So when you see those really, really cool patterns on pigeons, is that because there's been some sort of mixing with like captive pigeons that have been released? Like when you get the cool like cow print ones and such?
I think yes. So like I see all white ones that freak me out once in a while too. And I assume that is, I know many of them have been bred. There are those that are bred for like different kinds for like the homing type pigeons. And if they've not returned and then bred in the wild, etc. But The rock pigeon itself, right, the feral pigeon, does have, it's just one of those species of birds, like red-tailed hawks are this way, that just have several variations and morphs, right? For so many crazy reasons, and I'm not even exactly sure all of the reasons. But outside of those main ones I showed in that picture, the other really like different ones, my guess is that's some crossbreeding, some escapees, etc. Yeah.
Great, thanks. My cat just found something interesting, so you might hear some banging around in the background. Let's just ignore it. So we don't have any more questions in the chat, but thank you all so much for coming today. And I hope everyone can participate in the City Nature Challenge. Remember, you don't have to be in Lincoln or Omaha. There is a global project as well on iNaturalist, and that link is in the chat. If you can just go ahead and fill out that evaluation for us. And if you want, you can join in on Tuesday for our Nature Nerd Night. We'll be talking to Katie Lampe with the Xerces Society about community science in Nebraska.
And definitely make sure to include kids and grandkids in the nature challenge. They love it. Thanks, everybody.